we just caught a glimpse of a real bright light. Just in like an instant after that, we were all blasted up against the walls.
New questions today about whether the White House knew that this week it hosted a man with a very bloody past, I should say. Back on June 25th, 1996, a terrorist blew up a truck bomb outside of Khobar Towers, housing U.S. and allied forces supporting the coalition air operation over Iraq. 19 U.S. servicemen died in that attack. Approximately 500 others were wounded. In June of 2001, the U.S. handed down 14 indictments in relation to that attack, linking the plan to Hezbollah, a group supported by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And a new report is raising questions about a visit by the Iraqi Prime Minister to the White House this week. He brought with him a man some believe has knowledge of that attack that killed 19 American servicemen, or may perhaps have even been directly involved in it. The question now, did the White House know that it was hosting this man who may have the blood of so many American soldiers on his hands? George Terwilliger is former Deputy Attorney General at the Justice Department, and Ambassador John Bolton is the former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations and Fox News contributor. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for being here. George, let me start with you. Just this man, most of our viewers will not know this name. So tell us who this man is. His name is Hadi Farhan al-Amiri. Now he's the transportation minister in the Iraqi government, but he has another role which is making his appearance at the White House very controversial.
Well, Megan, according to many sources, from former FBI Director Louis Freeh to intelligence sources, public reporting, al-Amiri has a long history of, in fact, being an agent of Iranian interests, and specifically the Revolutionary Guard and some of the terrorist organizations they support. He was arrested by Iraqi officials in December of 2006, so this is not ancient history, with the Badr forces who were engaged in fomenting a lot of the unrest that took place, the sectarian violence in Iraq at the time.
So there is a question about his ties to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, Ambassador Bolton, and whether specifically, we do not know the answer to this yet, but whether specifically he may have had some role in that attack that took the lives of so many. And the question is, why would the White House have allowed a man like that, about whom at least there are these questions, to come into the White House?
Well, there are two possibilities. One is that they didn't know what this background was, which would be pretty troubling to say the least. The other is that they knew what the background was and let him in anyway, which would be even more troubling. You know, this Revolutionary Guard involvement with attacks on American soldiers in Iraq, in the very conflict that Prime Minister al-Maliki was at the White House to celebrate the end of with President Obama, it's just an incredible thumb in our eye, both by the al-Maliki government and indirectly by Iran, if they were able to pull this off. And I really think, although it's not clear exactly what the White House knew, they need to own up to it and tell the American people what they did or didn't do in allowing this man to come in.
George, you mentioned Louis Freeh, who served as the FBI director during the Clinton administration. Now, he came out and said it is shocking that they would bring him, that al-Maliki would include Mr. al-Amiri in his visit to Washington, and said this group, of course, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, has been involved in countless acts of terrorism, and went on to say that as a senior leader in that group, this guy Amiri, who was at the White House on Monday, would have to have known about the Khobar Tower attack. He would have known the general who conducted the operation, and there is a real question about whether this guy wasn't sitting in the FBI offices being cross-examined as opposed to in a position of, you know, access and some would argue honor at the White House. What say you? Is this a diplomatic snafu by al-Maliki, by our White House, by anyone?
Well, I think Ambassador Bolton is right. It's an affront, and it's an affront to a lot of people. Megan, right now I represent the diplomatic personnel and military personnel who the Revolutionary Guard took hostage at our embassy in Tehran in 1979. Every time the Congress has tried to give them their day in court to get redress against Iran, the administration has stepped in and gotten their way. Imagine how they feel to understand that this man is at the White House. And I think there's a larger political issue here that harkens back to 1979. The Carter administration paid a price for the failure of its policy in dealing with Iran. This administration has had a policy of constructive engagement with Iran that seems to be getting us nowhere. And now, if pursuant to that policy, they brought this man to the White House, I think it's going to highlight this as a political issue in the presidential campaign that you're in the thick of out in Iowa.
You know, Ambassador, the White House had referred initial inquiries on this to the Iraqi government to try to get to the bottom of who this guy is and what he was doing there. The victims of that Khobar Towers attack are expressing serious outrage. One gentleman, William Schooley, who survived the bombing, came out and said, quote, "Outrage at the visit to the White House really doesn't describe what I feel." See, he went on to say, "I watched outstanding airmen die that night and witnessed horrific carnage," and really is scratching his head, as are so many others, about why this man, who we don't have direct proof that he was linked to these attacks, but, you know, the linkage to this group that was behind the attacks has raised eyebrows. The question I have for you is nonetheless an adequate response by the White House to say, look, now he's the transportation minister of the Iraqi government, and it is not our position to tell al-Maliki that he can't appoint him to that position or bring him with him when he comes to the United States.
Well, that doesn't mean they have to let him into the White House, but, you know, the purpose of this whole ceremony and the other events with al-Maliki was to celebrate Americans withdrawing from Iraq, and to have an agent of influence of the Iranian government there in al-Maliki's cabinet, if that's what this turns out to be, just shows exactly what's wrong with the idea of withdrawing all of our forces. We properly fear an increase in Iranian influence in Iraq and around the region, and this is the perfect symbol of it. So I think that there's the outrage of the victims of Khobar Towers, there's the outrage of the Americans killed by Iranian agents and their terrorists that they supported inside Iraq during these last 10 years, and there's our grave concern about Iran's expanding influence. All of that needs to be addressed.